The day Patricia Morrison from the HOA knocked on my garage door while I was pressing copper fittings in my hydraulic press. I knew my life in Riverside, California, was about to get complicated. I'm Quinton Armstrong, and I run a small machining business out of my property on Maple Ridge Drive. When I moved into this neighborhood 3 years ago, I specifically chose a house with enough land to operate my shop legally. The property was zoned for home-based businesses. I had all my permits from the city, and I'd even gotten approval from the fire marshal. Everything was above board. But apparently that wasn't enough for Patricia Morrison, the self-appointed queen of our HOA board. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice already carrying that sharp edge of disapproval I'd come to associate with her neighborhood patrols. "Are you Quinton Armstrong?" I released the pressure on my hydraulic press, watching as a perfectly formed copper fitting rolled into the collection bin. "That's me. What can I do for you?" Patricia was in her late 40s, with blonde highlights that looked expensive and a permanent expression like she was smelling something unpleasant. She wore a pressed white blouse and khaki pants, clutching a leather-bound folder against her chest like it was a shield. Behind her stood 2 other HOA board members I recognized from the quarterly meetings I usually skipped. "I'm Patricia Morrison, HOA president. This is Sandra Chen, our treasurer, and Robert Dalton, secretary. We need to discuss your operation here." She gestured vaguely at my workshop, her nose wrinkling. My shop was a detached building on my property, about 30 feet from my house. I'd invested nearly $50,000 into making it a professional workspace. The floor was sealed concrete, the walls were insulated with fire-resistant material, and I had proper ventilation systems installed throughout. Every tool had its place on labeled shadow boards, and I kept detailed maintenance logs for all my equipment. "What about it?" I asked, wiping my hands on a clean shop towel. I'd learned over the years that staying calm with people like Patricia was the best approach. She opened her folder with a dramatic flourish. "We've received multiple complaints about noise, potential safety hazards, and the general appearance of commercial activity in a residential area. According to Section 14.7 of our HOA bylaws, no homeowner shall operate equipment that produces noise levels exceeding 55 decibels past the property line." I leaned against my workbench. My hydraulic press is electric and runs at about 48 decibels during operation. "That's quieter than most lawn mowers. Who complained?" Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "The complaints are anonymous as per our privacy policy, but that's not the only issue. Section 22.3 states that no hazardous machinery shall be stored or operated on residential property without HOA approval." "Hydraulic presses aren't hazardous machinery," I said, keeping my voice level. "They're industrial equipment, sure, but they're not classified as hazardous. I have all my city permits right here." I walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder containing my business license, zoning approval, insurance certificates, and equipment safety certifications. Sandra Chen, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. She seemed less aggressive than Patricia, more curious than hostile. "May I see those?" I handed her the folder, and she began flipping through the documents. Her expression shifted from skeptical to surprised as she read. "These all appear to be in order," Sandra said quietly to Patricia. "He has approval from the city planning department, the fire marshal, and even an inspection certificate from last year." Patricia snatched the folder from Sandra's hands. "City approval doesn't supersede HOA regulations. Our bylaws are clear about maintaining the residential character of this neighborhood. A commercial workshop with hydraulic presses, metalworking equipment, and industrial storage contradicts that mission. The property was zoned for home-based businesses before the HOA even existed, I pointed out. I checked the records. This HOA was formed in 2018, but the zoning designation goes back to 2005. My business activities fall well within the legal parameters of my property use. Robert Dalton finally spoke up. He was a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous energy about him. Perhaps we can reach a compromise, maybe limiting operating hours or reducing the visual impact from the street. My garage door faces away from the street, I said. You can't even see my workshop from the road, and I already only operate during reasonable hours, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays, never on Sundays. Patricia wasn't having it. This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Armstrong. We're issuing a formal notice that you have 30 days to cease all commercial operations on this property or face fines of $500 per day, per violation. My jaw tightened. On what legal basis? On the basis that every homeowner in Maple Ridge Estates signed an agreement to abide by HOA regulations when they purchased their property. That includes you. She pulled out another document from her folder and thrust it toward me. This is your signature, isn't it? I took the paper and examined it. It was indeed the HOA agreement I'd signed at closing, but I'd read it carefully at the time. This agreement states, I'll maintain my property according to aesthetic standards and won't operate businesses that create public nuisances. My shop is well maintained, professionally built, and doesn't disturb anyone. I'm in compliance. We'll let our lawyers determine that, Patricia said coldly. You have 30 days. Good afternoon, Mr. Armstrong. The three of them walked back down my driveway, Patricia's heels clicking sharply on the concrete. I stood there for a long moment, anger simmering in my chest. I'd done everything right, followed every rule, gotten every permit. But apparently, that wasn't enough for Patricia Morrison. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching HOA law in California. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this was going to be a battle. HOAs in California had significant power, but they weren't unlimited. They couldn't supersede state or federal regulations, and they couldn't enforce rules that violated fair housing or business laws. The question was whether my situation fell into a protected category. That evening, I called my neighbor, Marcus Wellington. Marcus was a real estate attorney who lived 3 houses down, and we'd become friends over the past few years. He often stopped by my shop to watch me work on projects. Quinton, I was wondering when you'd call, Marcus said when he picked up. Patricia came to see me last week, asking about the legal process for shutting down home businesses. I told her she was on thin ice, but she didn't want to hear it. She gave me 30 days to shut down or face daily fines. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's aggressive, even for her. Listen, can you come over tonight? I want to look at your permits and that HOA notice together. An hour later, I was sitting in Marcus's home office, watching him read through everything with a practiced eye. His wife, Jennifer, brought us coffee and gave me a sympathetic smile before leaving us alone. Okay, here's the situation, Marcus said, setting down the papers. Patricia is overstepping significantly. Your property's zoning predates the HOA, which means your right to operate a home-based business is grandfathered in. The HOA can't retroactively change that without violating California state law. So I'm in the clear. Legally, yes. Practically, it's more complicated. Patricia can still make your life difficult through harassment, frivolous fines, and constant complaints. I've seen her do it to other homeowners. She doesn't like losing control, and she views your shop as a challenge to her authority. I sipped my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. What do you suggest? Document everything. Every interaction, every complaint, every piece of communication from the HOA. Take photos of your shop, maintain your inspection records, and keep copies of all your permits accessible. If she escalates, we'll need evidence that you've been operating responsibly and that any actions she takes are retaliatory. Should I get a lawyer? Marcus smiled. You're talking to one. I'll represent you pro bono if it comes to that. Patricia's been overstepping her bounds for years, and frankly, someone needs to push back. Last year, she tried to fine the Hendersons for painting their house a shade of beige that wasn't on the approved color list. The difference was barely visible to the human eye. I remember that. They ended up repainting, didn't they? Because they couldn't afford to fight it. That's Patricia's strategy. She targets people who can't or won't fight back, then uses those victories to justify more aggressive actions. But you have resources, documentation, and you're clearly in the right. She picked the wrong person this time. I left Marcus's house feeling more confident, but also aware that this was just the beginning. Patricia Morrison didn't seem like the type to back down easily. The next morning, I opened my shop as usual. I had orders to fill, including a custom bracket set for a local contractor and several precision parts for a medical equipment manufacturer in Los Angeles. My business might have been small, but it was profitable and had a solid reputation for quality work. Around 10 a.m., I heard a vehicle pull up outside. Through the window, I saw a white pickup truck with Riverside County Code Enforcement printed on the side. A heavy-set man in his 30s climbed out, carrying a clipboard. "Quinton Armstrong," he called out. "That's me." I set down the piece I was working on and walked over. "I'm Dave Mitchell, Code Enforcement. We received a complaint about unpermitted construction and potentially hazardous operations at this address. Mind if I take a look around?" I felt a flash of anger but pushed it down. Patricia was wasting no time. "Sure, come on in. I have all my permits and inspection records right here." Dave spent the next hour going through my shop with thorough professionalism. He checked my electrical systems, ventilation, fire suppression equipment, and structural modifications. He examined my permits, cross-referenced them with his county records, and took detailed notes. Finally, he straightened up and faced me. "Mr. Armstrong, I don't know who filed this complaint, but I can tell you right now that your shop is completely up to code. In fact, it's one of the better home workshops I've seen. Your fire suppression system exceeds minimum requirements, your electrical work is professional grade, and your safety equipment is current. Whoever reported you either doesn't know what they're talking about or had ulterior motives." "Can you tell me who filed the complaint?" Dave hesitated. "Normally, complaints are confidential, but in this case, it came through your HOA president, Patricia Morrison. She claimed you were operating dangerous equipment without proper safety measures and that your construction might be unpermitted. She was here yesterday afternoon. She saw everything was professional and up to code. Then she filed a false complaint with the county. I'm going to note that in my report." Dave handed me a form. "This is your inspection clearance. Keep it on file. If she continues to harass you with false reports, you might want to consider documenting it for a harassment claim." After Dave left, I called Marcus and filled him in. "She's escalating faster than I expected," Marcus said. "File a formal complaint with the HOA board about her harassment. Send it certified mail so there's a record. And start documenting everything Patricia does or says regarding your shop." I spent my lunch break drafting a detailed letter to the HOA board, outlining Patricia's threats, the false code enforcement complaint, and my legal right to operate my business. I included copies of all my permits, the code enforcement clearance, and the property zoning documentation. Then I drove to the post office and sent its certified mail to every board member individually. The next few days were quiet. I worked on my projects, filled my orders, and kept detailed logs of everything. Then, on Friday afternoon, I received an email from the HOA's law firm. The letter was dense with legal language, but the message was clear. The HOA was demanding I cease operations immediately and was threatening to place a lien on my property if I didn't comply. They claimed my business violated the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and that my continued operation constituted a breach of contract. I forwarded the email to Marcus immediately. "They're bluffing," Marcus said when he called me back. "An HOA can't place a lien on your property for operating a legally permitted business. This is intimidation, pure and simple. I'm going to draft a response from my firm, making it clear that any attempt to interfere with your lawful business operations will result in a lawsuit for harassment and interference with business relations." Will that stop them? It should give them pause. If it doesn't, we'll escalate. But Quinton, you need to be prepared. Patricia seems determined to push this as far as she can. That weekend, I decided to do something I normally avoided. I attended the monthly HOA meeting at the community clubhouse. I wanted to see Patricia's reaction to Marcus's letter and gauge the other board members' positions. The clubhouse was a single-story building near the neighborhood entrance, with a meeting room, small kitchen, and outdoor patio. About 20 homeowners were scattered around the folding chairs when I arrived. Patricia sat at the head table with Sandra, Robert, and 2 other board members I didn't recognize. Patricia's eyes narrowed when she saw me, but she continued with her opening remarks about landscaping standards and upcoming community events. Finally, she reached the new business section of the agenda. "We have a situation with a homeowner operating a commercial workshop in violation of our community standards," Patricia began, her gaze fixed on me. "Despite multiple warnings and a formal notice, this homeowner refuses to comply with HOA regulations." An older man I recognized as George Porter raised his hand. "Who are we talking about, and what kind of business?" Quinton Armstrong is running a metalworking shop with industrial equipment, including hydraulic presses and other dangerous machinery. I stood up. "I'd like to address the board if that's permitted." Patricia looked like she wanted to refuse, but Robert nodded. "Homeowners have the right to speak during open forum." I walked to the front, pulling out my folder of documents. "Patricia is misrepresenting the situation. I operate a small precision machining business from a properly permitted workshop on my property. Everything is up to code, as confirmed by county code enforcement just this week. My property was zoned for home-based businesses before this HOA even existed, which means my operations are grandfathered and protected under California law." I held up the code enforcement clearance. "This is from Dave Mitchell, the county inspector who examined my shop. He found everything not only meets code but exceeds it." Patricia filed a complaint claiming I had dangerous, unpermitted construction. That complaint was determined to be false. Murmurs spread through the room. Several homeowners leaned forward, interested now. "Furthermore," I continued, "I've received threatening letters from the HOA's legal counsel despite having every legal right to operate my business. This appears to be targeted harassment rather than legitimate enforcement of community standards." George Porter spoke up again. "Patricia, did you actually file a false complaint with the county?" Patricia's face flushed red. "I filed a legitimate concern about potential safety hazards in our neighborhood." "But the inspector found nothing wrong," George pressed. "That sounds like you wasted county resources and made false claims." Sandra Chen, the treasurer, cleared her throat. I've reviewed the documents Mr. Armstrong provided to the board. He does appear to have proper permits and zoning approval. Patricia, why are we pursuing this if he's operating legally? Because HOA covenants can be more restrictive than city or county regulations. Patricia snapped. We have the right to maintain higher standards for our community. Actually, you don't, Marcus Wellington said, standing up from where he'd been sitting in the back row. I hadn't even noticed he'd come in. Not when those restrictions violate state law or interfere with grandfathered property rights. I've reviewed this case thoroughly, and the HOA has no legal standing to prevent Mr. Armstrong from operating his business. Patricia's face turned an even deeper shade of red. This is a meeting for homeowners, not their hired lawyers. I'm a homeowner, Marcus said calmly. I live on Oakwood Court. And as someone who actually understands property law, I'm advising this board that continuing to harass Mr. Armstrong will expose the HOA to significant legal liability. If you place a lien on his property or continue making false claims, you're opening the door to a lawsuit that could cost every homeowner in this neighborhood thousands of dollars in legal fees and damages. The room erupted in concerned chatter. Robert Dalton looked pale, and Sandra was whispering urgently to the other board members. George Porter stood up. I move that we table any action against Mr. Armstrong until the board can get an independent legal opinion on our actual authority in this matter. Second, called out a woman I didn't know from the middle of the room. Patricia tried to maintain control. All those in favor, nearly every hand in the room went up. Motion carries, Robert said, making a note. Patricia, we need to consult with our attorney about this before proceeding. Patricia gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. Fine. But this isn't over. We have rules in this community for a reason. The meeting moved on to other business, but I could feel the shift in the room. People kept glancing at me with curiosity rather than concern. After the meeting ended, several homeowners came up to introduce themselves and ask about my business. George Porter even gave me his card and said he might need some custom metalwork done for a sculpture he was creating. As I was leaving, Sandra Chen caught up with me in the parking lot. Mr. Armstrong, I want to apologize, she said. I trusted Patricia's characterization of your business without doing my own research. That was wrong of me. After seeing your permits and hearing from the code inspector, it's clear you're operating responsibly. I appreciate that, I said. I'm not trying to cause problems. I just want to run my business and be a good neighbor. I understand. I'm going to recommend to the board that we drop this matter entirely. Patricia has a tendency to take things personally, but most of the board members are reasonable people. Over the next week, I heard nothing from the HOA. My business continued as normal, and I started to hope that maybe the confrontation at the meeting had been enough to end Patricia's campaign against me. I should have known better. On Thursday morning, I arrived at my shop to find a bright orange sticker plastered across my garage door. Unsafe conditions do not enter by order of HOA board. It read in large black letters. I peeled it off, furious. This was beyond harassment now. Patricia was actively trying to interfere with my business operations. I took photos of the sticker from multiple angles, noted the time and date, and then called Marcus. She's crossed a line, Marcus said grimly. The HOA has no authority to declare your property unsafe or prevent you from accessing your own building. This is actionable harassment. I'm going to file for an emergency restraining order against the HOA and Patricia specifically, preventing any further interference with your business. How long will that take? I can file today. We might get a hearing as early as next week. In the meantime, document everything. If anyone from the HOA comes onto your property or tries to prevent you from working, call the police immediately. That afternoon, Patricia herself showed up at my shop. She didn't bother knocking, just walked right up to where I was working on calibrating my press. "I told you to cease operations," she said coldly. "That sticker was an official notice. You're in violation of a direct order from the HOA board." "The HOA has no authority to issue such orders," I replied, not bothering to stop my work. "And you're trespassing on my property. I'd like you to leave." "This entire property is subject to HOA jurisdiction. I have every right to inspect it for violations." "No, you don't. You need my permission to be here and you don't have it. Leave now or I'm calling the police." Patricia's face twisted with anger. "You think you're so smart, don't you, with your lawyer friend and your permits, but I've dealt with difficult homeowners before and I always win. Always." "Patricia, leave. Now." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "I will make your life hell. Every day, every week, until you give up and leave this neighborhood. I don't care how many lawyers you hire or how many permits you have. This is my community, and I decide what's acceptable." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You're threatening to harass me. I want you to leave my property immediately." Patricia's eyes widened when she saw the phone, then she turned and stormed off. But I'd gotten everything on video, including her explicit threats. Marcus was delighted when I sent him the video. "This is perfect." She admitted to an ongoing harassment campaign on camera. "The judge will eat this up. I'm amending our filing to include this footage." The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday at the Riverside County Courthouse. I took the morning off, dressed in a clean button-down shirt and slacks, and met Marcus outside the courtroom. Patricia was there with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit named Gregory Harrison. Sandra Chen and Robert Dalton were also present, both looking uncomfortable. The hearing was before Judge Martha Reynolds, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with sharp eyes. She reviewed our filings, watched the video I'd recorded, and examined all the permits and documentation. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Judge Reynolds said, looking at Patricia and her attorney. "Mr. Armstrong operates a legally permitted business from property that was zoned for such use before your HOA existed. He has all required permits, has passed all safety inspections, and operates during reasonable hours. Yet your organization has filed false complaints with county code enforcement, attempted to restrict his access to his own property, and this individual," she gestured at Patricia, "has explicitly threatened him with ongoing harassment." "Is that accurate?" Gregory Harrison stood up. "Your Honor, the HOA has a legitimate interest in maintaining community standards and protecting property values." "That doesn't answer my question, Counselor. Did your client file a false complaint with code enforcement?" Miss Morrison had concerns about safety that she reported in good faith. "After the property had already been inspected and approved by the fire marshal and city planning department," Judge Reynolds noted. "That doesn't sound like good faith to me. It sounds like harassment." Patricia stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, this man is destroying the character of our neighborhood with his industrial operations. We have children playing nearby, families trying to enjoy their homes. He's running dangerous machinery that could hurt someone." "Sit down, Miss Morrison," the judge said sharply. "Your attorney speaks for you in this courtroom. And for your information, I've reviewed the inspection reports. Mr. Armstrong's workshop meets or exceeds all safety standards. His hydraulic press is electric, not pneumatic, and operates more quietly than a vacuum cleaner. The only danger I see here is from your organization's campaign of harassment." She looked down at the papers in front of her. I'm granting a temporary restraining order. Miss. Patricia's face had gone from red to pale. Furthermore, Judge Reynolds continued, I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Armstrong's legal fees related to this matter. Your organization's actions have been egregious and have caused unnecessary expense and stress. The restraining order will remain in effect for 1 year, at which point we'll review whether it needs to be extended. Your Honor, this is outrageous, Gregory Harrison protested. You're essentially preventing the HOA from performing its duties. I'm preventing it from harassing a homeowner who's operating legally. There's a significant difference. If the HOA has legitimate concerns in the future, it can address them through proper legal channels, not through intimidation and false complaints. Judge Reynolds banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Marcus and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright California sunshine. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That went better than I expected, I admitted. Judge Reynolds is tough on HOA overreach. She's dealt with too many cases like yours. But Quinton, don't assume this is over. Patricia strikes me as someone who doesn't accept defeat gracefully. Marcus was right. 2 days after the hearing, I received a notice that the HOA was calling for a special assessment vote. Every homeowner would be charged $3,000 to cover unexpected legal expenses and enhanced community security measures. The notice was carefully worded to avoid mentioning me directly, but the timing made it clear this was retaliation. Patricia was trying to turn the neighborhood against me by making everyone pay for the legal fees the HOA had been ordered to cover. I sent a copy to Marcus, who immediately filed a motion with the court claiming the special assessment was retaliatory and violated the restraining order. But before the court could rule, something unexpected happened. George Porter called me on Saturday morning. Quinton, there's a recall petition circulating to remove Patricia from the HOA board. Sandra Chen started it. She's collected signatures from about 40% of homeowners already. Because of the special assessment, that's part of it. But people are also angry about the legal fees, the harassment campaign, and frankly, Patricia's general attitude. This isn't the first time she's gone after a homeowner over something petty. The issue with you was just the last straw. What can I do to help? Nothing, actually. It's better if you stay out of it, but I wanted you to know that the neighborhood isn't turning against you. Most people think Patricia went way too far. The recall election was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, I focused on my business and tried to stay out of neighborhood politics. But then something happened that changed everything. On a Tuesday afternoon, I was working in my shop when I heard sirens. Through my window, I saw emergency vehicles racing down the street toward the community clubhouse. Curious and concerned, I walked down to see what was happening. A crowd of homeowners had gathered outside the clubhouse. Fire trucks, police cars, and paramedics filled the parking lot. George Porter was in the crowd, and I made my way over to him. What happened? I asked. Structural problem, George said grimly. Maria Santos was in the clubhouse kitchen preparing for a community event when part of the ceiling collapsed. She's being taken to the hospital now, but it looks like she'll be okay. Mostly cuts and bruises. My stomach dropped. Jesus. Was anyone else inside? No, thank God. But the fire marshal is here, and from what I'm hearing, the clubhouse has serious structural issues. Apparently, there's water damage, possible mold, and the roof has been compromised for a while. As we watched, Fire Marshal Thomas Bradley emerged from the clubhouse with a grim expression. He immediately posted a red tag on the door, declaring the building unsafe for occupancy. Patricia arrived a few minutes later, pushing through the crowd. What's going on? Who authorized the fire department to be here? Fire Marshal Bradley turned to face her. I'm Fire Marshal Bradley. Are you the HOA president? Yes, Patricia Morrison. This is ridiculous. The clubhouse is perfectly safe. Madam, I just conducted an emergency inspection after part of your ceiling collapsed and injured someone. This building is a disaster. You have significant water damage, structural rot in the roof supports, mold throughout the walls, and electrical issues that are borderline fire hazards. When was the last time this building was properly inspected? Patricia's face flushed. We have regular maintenance. I'm going to need to see documentation of that, because from what I'm seeing, this building has been neglected for years. He pulled out a clipboard. I'm issuing a red tag. No one enters this building until comprehensive repairs are completed and the structure passes a full safety inspection. I'm also reporting this to code enforcement and OSHA. OSHA, Patricia sputtered. This is a private community building, not a workplace. You hold community events here. People work here. That makes it subject to OSHA regulations regarding building safety. Fire Marshal Bradley made some notes on his clipboard. Someone from OSHA will be in contact with you within the next few days. As Fire Marshal Bradley walked back to his truck, I caught his eye. He paused, recognition crossing his face. You're Quinton Armstrong, right? I inspected your workshop about 2 years ago when you first set it up. That's right. Thought so. Your shop was one of the best home workshops I've ever inspected. Excellent safety protocols, professional-grade equipment, everything properly maintained. He glanced back at the clubhouse with disgust. Wish more people took safety as seriously as you do. This building is a disaster waiting to happen. Actually, it already happened. That woman is lucky the whole roof didn't come down. The OSHA inspector arrived 3 days later. His name was Daniel Wright, and he was thorough to the point of being intimidating. I happened to be at the neighborhood entrance when he arrived, and I watched him spend over 4 hours examining the clubhouse. I was back in my shop, working on a custom order when Daniel knocked on my open garage door. Mr. Armstrong. I'm Daniel Wright from OSHA. Fire Marshal Bradley mentioned you have a workshop on your property that he was impressed with. Mind if I take a look? Professional curiosity. Sure, come on in. Daniel spent about 30 minutes walking through my shop, examining my equipment, safety systems, and operational procedures. He checked my hydraulic press, my ventilation system, my fire suppression equipment, and my safety documentation. Finally, he straightened up and shook his head in amazement. This is remarkable. Your shop is safer and better maintained than most commercial facilities I inspect. You have proper lockout-tagout procedures for all your equipment. Your hydraulic press has appropriate safety guards and pressure relief systems. Your ventilation exceeds minimum requirements, and your fire suppression system is state-of-the-art. How long have you been doing this? About 15 years, but I've only had this particular shop for 3 years. It shows you clearly take safety seriously. He paused. I have to ask, is this the shop your HOA was complaining about? That's the one. They tried to shut me down, claimed I was operating dangerous equipment unsafely. Daniel's expression darkened. That's rich, considering I just spent the morning documenting dozens of serious safety violations at their clubhouse. The place is a death trap. Water damage has compromised the structural integrity. There's black mold throughout the walls. The electrical system is outdated and improperly maintained, and the roof has been leaking for so long that several support beams are rotting. Fire Marshal Bradley told me someone was injured when part of the ceiling collapsed, but honestly, I'm shocked that's the worst that's happened so far. What happens now? I'll be issuing a comprehensive report documenting all the violations and recommending penalties. The HOA is going to be facing significant fines, and we'll need to either completely renovate the building or tear it down and start over. Either way, it's going to cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars." He shook his head. "And they had the nerve to complain about your shop, which is safer than their clubhouse by every measurable standard. Is there any way I can get a copy of your assessment?" I asked. "Not of the clubhouse, I mean, of my shop. The HOA has been claiming I operate dangerous equipment unsafely, and I'd like to have documentation from OSHA confirming otherwise." Daniel considered this. "I'll do you one better. I'll write up a formal letter stating that I inspected your facility and found it to be in full compliance with all applicable OSHA standards, with safety measures that exceed minimum requirements. That should help if they try to come after you again. I'd really appreciate that." Daniel was true to his word. 2 days later, I received a detailed letter on official OSHA letterhead documenting his inspection and praising my shop's safety standards. The letter specifically noted that my hydraulic press was properly maintained, equipped with appropriate safety systems, and operated in a manner that posed minimal risk to users or bystanders. I made several copies and filed them with my other documentation. Marcus suggested I also send a copy to the HOA board, along with a pointed note about the contrast between my shop and their clubhouse. The recall election happened the following week. Patricia Morrison was removed from the HOA board by a vote of 87 to 12. Sandra Chen was elected as the new president, with George Porter as vice president. Robert Dalton chose to resign rather than continue serving. Sandra's first action as president was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the HOA and withdraw all complaints and actions against my business. She also announced that the special assessment Patricia had tried to push through was being canceled, and that the board would be exploring other funding options for the clubhouse repairs. But the story didn't end there. About 2 weeks after the OSHA inspection, I received a call from Detective Lisa Mendez with the Riverside Police Department. She asked if she could come by to talk to me about the HOA situation. When Detective Mendez arrived that afternoon, she was accompanied by another detective, James Patterson. They asked if we could talk inside my house rather than the shop. "Mr. Armstrong, we're investigating some financial irregularities with the Maple Ridge Estates, HOA," Detective Mendez said once we were seated in my living room. "Specifically, we're looking into how funds were managed under Patricia Morrison's leadership. Your name has come up in our investigation, though not as a suspect. We understand you were targeted by Miss Morrison in what appears to have been a harassment campaign." "That's right. She tried to force me to shut down my business, even though I had all the proper permits and approvals." "We're aware. We've reviewed the court documents and the restraining order. What we're trying to determine is whether Miss Morrison's actions were merely overzealous enforcement of HOA rules or part of a broader pattern of misconduct." Detective Patterson leaned forward. The new HOA board hired a forensic accountant to review the association's finances. They've discovered some concerning discrepancies. Over the past 3 years, approximately $215,000 in HOA funds are unaccounted for. Additionally, there are records of payments to contractors for work that was either never completed or significantly overcharged. I felt a chill run down my spine. "You think Patricia was embezzling?" "We're still gathering evidence, but it's looking that way," Detective Mendez said. The forensic accountant found that most of the questionable transactions occurred during periods when Patricia had sole signing authority over HOA accounts. She also discovered that the clubhouse repairs that should have been covered by regular maintenance funds were repeatedly delayed, with the money apparently redirected to other purposes. Which explains why the building fell into such disrepair, I said. Exactly. The clubhouse should have been properly maintained with regular HOA dues. Instead, it was neglected to the point of becoming dangerous. Meanwhile, Miss Morrison was living well beyond her means, taking expensive vacations, driving a new luxury car, and renovating her home. Detective Patterson pulled out a notepad. We're talking to everyone who had significant interactions with Miss Morrison regarding HOA business. Did she ever discuss finances with you, mention contractors, or say anything that seemed unusual regarding how HOA funds were being spent? I thought back through my interactions with Patricia. Not really. Our conversations were mostly about her trying to shut down my shop. Although, now that you mention it, when she was threatening me, she did say something about how she dealt with difficult homeowners before and always won. At the time, I thought she meant she'd forced people to comply with HOA rules, but maybe there was more to it. You remember her exact words. I pulled out my phone. I have it on video. She came onto my property and made explicit threats. I recorded the whole thing. I played the video for the detectives, watching their expressions sharpen with interest as Patricia's voice came through clearly. I've dealt with difficult homeowners before, and I always win. Always. I will make your life hell. Every day, every week, until you give up and leave this neighborhood. Can we get a copy of that video? Detective Mendez asked. Absolutely. Over the next several weeks, the investigation into Patricia Morrison expanded. The forensic accountant uncovered an elaborate scheme where Patricia had been creating false invoices for maintenance and repairs, paying the inflated amounts to shell companies she controlled, and pocketing the difference. She'd also been charging personal expenses to the HOA credit card and falsifying records to hide the misappropriation. The total amount of embezzled funds came to nearly $275,000. Patricia was arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and filing false government reports. The false reports charge stemmed from her complaint to code enforcement about my shop, which prosecutors argued was part of her pattern of abusing her authority. The trial took place 4 months later. I was called as a witness to testify about Patricia's harassment campaign against me. Marcus explained that while the harassment itself wasn't the main charge, it established Patricia's pattern of behavior and her willingness to abuse her position for personal reasons. The prosecution argued that Patricia had targeted me specifically because I asked questions and paid attention to details. She viewed my shop as a threat not because of any safety concerns, but because she was afraid someone who ran a legitimate, well-documented business might start scrutinizing HOA finances. I spent 2 hours on the witness stand, walking through the timeline of Patricia's actions against me. I presented my permits, the code enforcement clearance, the OSHA letter, and the video of Patricia threatening me. The prosecutor used my case to show that Patricia believed she was untouchable and could manipulate HOA rules to serve her interests. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that the harassment campaign was unrelated to the embezzlement, but the jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they found Patricia Morrison guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. Patricia was given 5 years in prison, ordered to pay full restitution of $275,000 plus interest, and banned from serving on any HOA board or similar organization in the future. Several other homeowners came forward after Patricia's arrest, sharing their own stories of harassment and intimidation. The Hendersons, who had been forced to repaint their house, discovered that Patricia had been charging them for HOA lawyer fees that were vastly inflated. Another family had been fined repeatedly for minor landscaping violations, with the fines going into accounts Patricia controlled. The new HOA board, under Sandra Chen's leadership, worked to repair the damage. They negotiated settlements with homeowners who had been unfairly fined, restructured the HOA's financial systems to prevent future embezzlement, and started the long process of properly renovating the clubhouse. As for me, life returned to normal. My business continued to grow, and I never had another problem with the HOA. In fact, several neighbors started bringing me projects, and my reputation in the community improved significantly. About 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, Sandra Chen stopped by my shop. She carried a large envelope and looked slightly embarrassed. "Quinton, I wanted to give you this in person," she said, handing me the envelope. "It's a formal letter from the HOA board thanking you for standing up to Patricia. If you hadn't fought back and documented everything, we might never have discovered what she was doing. Your case was what prompted us to dig deeper into the finances." I opened the envelope and found a beautifully printed letter on official HOA stationery, signed by every current board member. It formally apologized for Patricia's harassment, acknowledged that my business was an asset to the community, and thanked me for my persistence in defending my rights. "There's also something else," Sandra continued. "The OSHA report on the clubhouse included a comparison to your shop. Daniel Wright wrote that if all home workshops were maintained to your standards, there would be virtually no workplace accidents. We'd like your permission to use your shop as a reference example when we talk to other homeowners about safety standards." "I'd be honored," I said. That evening, I sat in my workshop, looking around at everything I'd built. The journey from Patricia's first confrontation to her eventual arrest and conviction had taken nearly a year. It had been stressful, expensive, and at times frightening, but it had been worth it. I'd learned that standing up to bullies mattered, even when they had power and resources. I'd learned that documentation was everything, that legitimate authority came from following rules rather than manipulating them, and that communities worked better when people were held accountable for their actions. My hydraulic press sat in the corner, clean and well-maintained, ready for the next project. The same press Patricia had called dangerous and demanded I remove. The same press that OSHA had examined and found to be perfectly safe operated in a shop that exceeded professional safety standards. I smiled and got back to work. I had orders to fill, a business to run, and a future to build. And for the first time since Patricia Morrison had knocked on my garage door, I could do it all without looking over my shoulder. The legal system had worked, justice had been served, and the community was healing. Patricia's reign of intimidation and corruption was over, ended not by apathy or acceptance, but by someone who refused to be bullied and had the documentation to prove they were right. Looking back, I realized that the confrontation had taught me something important about HOAs and community living in general. These organizations could be forces for good, maintaining standards and building community. But they could also become tools of oppression when the wrong people gained control. The difference came down to accountability, transparency, and the willingness of homeowners to stand up when things went wrong. Marcus Wellington stopped by later that week to celebrate the end of the case. We sat in my shop, drinking beer and talking about everything that had happened. "You know what the ironic thing is," Marcus said. "If Patricia had just left you alone, she probably could have kept embezzling for years. But she couldn't stand the idea of someone in her neighborhood operating independently, following the rules without her approval. Her need for control is what brought her down. That, and terrible financial management of the clubhouse," I added. If she'd actually spent the money on maintenance instead of pocketing it, that ceiling never would have collapsed. True, but it all comes back to the same personality flaw. She thought she was above the rules, that her position gave her unlimited authority. When you challenged that, it triggered her into making increasingly desperate and obvious mistakes. I raised my beer bottle. Here's to megalomaniacs who overplay their hand. Marcus clinked his bottle against mine. And here's to having good documentation and a working hydraulic press. We both laughed, and I felt the last of the tension from the past year finally drain away. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal operations. The clubhouse renovation took nearly 8 months, but when it reopened, it was transformed. The new HOA board had hired legitimate contractors who brought the building up to modern safety standards. Regular safety inspections were now mandatory, and the HOA's finances were transparent, with monthly reports available to all homeowners. George Porter organized a community barbecue to celebrate the clubhouse reopening. I almost didn't go, worried that some neighbors might still associate me with all the drama. But Marcus convinced me to attend. To my surprise, people greeted me warmly. Several homeowners thanked me for standing up to Patricia, and a few even apologized for not supporting me earlier. The Hendersons brought their kids over to meet me, and their son, Tyler, peppered me with questions about hydraulic presses and metalworking. "Would you ever consider teaching a workshop?" Tyler asked. "Like showing people how this stuff works." I glanced at his parents, who were smiling encouragingly. "Maybe. I'd have to think about the logistics and safety requirements, but I'm not opposed to the idea." Sandra Chen overheard this exchange and lit up. "That would be wonderful. We could do community education workshops. I'm sure several people would be interested. Let me know if you'd like the HOA to help organize it." Over the next few months, I did end up teaching occasional workshops in my shop. Small groups of interested neighbors, usually 4 or 5 people at a time, would come by to learn about metalworking, safety procedures, and basic machinery operation. It became something I looked forward to, a way to connect with the community and share knowledge. Tyler Henderson became a regular visitor, stopping by after school to watch me work and ask questions. His enthusiasm reminded me of myself at that age, fascinated by how things worked and eager to learn. I started giving him small projects to work on under my supervision, teaching him proper safety protocols and basic skills. The business continued to grow as well. The publicity from the case, while stressful at the time, had actually raised my profile. Several articles in local papers had covered the story, focusing on the HOA corruption, but also mentioning my shop and the OSHA inspectors' praise for my safety standards. I started getting calls from customers throughout Southern California, and I had to turn down work because I couldn't keep up with demand. I considered expanding, maybe hiring an assistant or renting additional space. But for now, I was content with my setup. The shop ran smoothly, my equipment was reliable, and I enjoyed the work. Life was good. One afternoon, about a year after Patricia's sentencing, I received an unexpected visitor. Fire Marshal Thomas Bradley stopped by, out of uniform and driving his personal vehicle. "Mr. Armstrong, hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "I wanted to stop by personally to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "Your case prompted a wider review of HOA facilities throughout Riverside County. We've discovered that neglected maintenance is a common problem, often tied to financial mismanagement or just plain indifference. Because of the attention your situation brought to the issue, we've implemented new regulations requiring regular safety inspections of all community buildings. It's already prevented several potential disasters. I'm glad something good came from all of that mess," I said. More than you know. We're also using your shop as a teaching example in our home workshop safety seminars. With your permission, of course. We show photos of your setup and explain how proper planning and maintenance create a safe working environment. You have my permission. If it helps promote safety, I'm all for it. Thomas smiled. There's one more thing. OSHA and the Fire Marshal's Office are partnering on a recognition program for home-based businesses that demonstrate exceptional safety standards. We'd like to give you the first award. It comes with a plaque, a certificate, and a feature in our safety newsletter. I was genuinely touched. I'd be honored. The award ceremony took place the following month at the Riverside County Administrative Building. Daniel Wright from OSHA was there, along with Fire Marshal Bradley and several other safety officials. Sandra Chen came to represent the HOA, and Marcus brought his family to support me. Even George Porter showed up with his wife. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They presented me with a handsome wooden plaque and a framed certificate recognizing my shop as a model for home-based business safety. Daniel gave a short speech about the importance of taking safety seriously and how rare it was to find someone who exceeded standards rather than just meeting minimum requirements. In 15 years of conducting workplace inspections, Daniel said, I've seen thousands of facilities. Some are adequate, many are problematic, and a few are downright dangerous. But very rarely do I encounter a workspace that's genuinely exemplary. Quinton Armstrong's shop represents what's possible when someone combines professional knowledge with a genuine commitment to safety. His hydraulic press, the equipment that sparked this whole controversy, is operated more safely than comparable equipment in most commercial facilities. His shop should be the standard we aspire to, not something that gets targeted for complaints. Afterward, several people came up to congratulate me and ask questions about my business. A reporter from the Riverside Press Enterprise interviewed me, and the resulting article was both fair and complimentary. The headline read, Local Machinist's Home Shop Becomes Safety Standard After HOA Controversy. Life continued to improve. The neighborhood had stabilized under Sandra's leadership. The HOA operated transparently and fairly, and the community was stronger for having gone through the ordeal with Patricia. People were more engaged now, paying attention to HOA finances and decisions rather than assuming the board had everything under control. I sometimes thought about Patricia, sitting in prison and contemplating how her need for control had destroyed her life. She'd had a position of respect in the community, a comfortable life, and the opportunity to actually serve her neighbors. Instead, she'd chosen corruption and intimidation. The embezzlement had funded vacations and luxury purchases that she couldn't even enjoy now. And for what? A few years of living beyond her means, followed by prison and disgrace. Tyler Henderson continued to learn metalworking under my guidance. By the time he turned 16, he was competent enough to help with simple projects, always under supervision. His parents were grateful for the mentorship, and Tyler was already talking about studying mechanical engineering in college. You know what's funny? Tyler said one afternoon while we were working on a custom bracket order. My mom told me that when the whole thing with Patricia was happening, some people were saying your shop was dangerous and you shouldn't be operating machinery in a neighborhood. But I've learned more about real safety from you than anywhere else. You don't just follow rules. You understand why the rules exist. That's the key, I said, checking his work on the brake press. Safety isn't about memorizing regulations. It's about understanding risks and mitigating them. Good job on this bend, by the way. Your angles are consistent. Marcus Wellington organized a neighborhood meeting about a year and a half after Patricia's arrest to discuss the HOA's recovery and future direction. The meeting took place in the newly renovated Clubhouse, which was now a point of pride rather than an embarrassment. Sandra Chen opened the meeting by reviewing the HOA's finances. All the embezzled funds had been recovered through Patricia's restitution payments and insurance claims. The organization was on solid financial footing, with clear budgets and regular audits. "We've learned hard lessons," Sandra said. "But we've also grown stronger. Our community is more engaged, our finances are transparent, and our buildings are safe. We've turned a crisis into an opportunity for improvement." George Porter stood up. "I want to add something. This community owes Quinton Armstrong a debt of gratitude." When Patricia was abusing her power, most of us stayed quiet. We didn't want the conflict, didn't want to rock the boat. But Quinton stood up and fought back, and in doing so, he exposed corruption that was hurting all of us. His courage made everything else possible. The room erupted in applause. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but I appreciated the recognition. It had been a hard fight, and there were times when I'd wondered if it was worth the stress and expense. But sitting in that room, seeing the community healthy and functioning properly, I knew it had been worth it. After the meeting, several homeowners approached me with business proposals. One couple wanted custom iron railings for their renovated staircase. Another homeowner needed specialty brackets for a solar panel installation. A small general contractor asked if I'd be interested in being his go-to fabricator for custom metalwork. My business had not only survived Patricia's harassment campaign, it had thrived. The publicity, the OSHA recognition, and the support of the community had opened doors I hadn't anticipated. I was busier than ever, doing work I enjoyed, and building relationships throughout the area. On the 2-year anniversary of the day Patricia first knocked on my garage door, I took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. I was standing in my shop, looking at my hydraulic press, when Marcus walked in. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. "Just thinking about how much has changed. 2 years ago I was worried I might lose my business because of one vindictive woman. Now I have more work than I can handle, awards on my wall, and I'm teaching the next generation of makers." Marcus leaned against my workbench. "You know what the real victory is? Patricia tried to destroy you because she couldn't control you, but you didn't just survive, you thrived. Your business is stronger, the community respects you, and you've become a safety advocate. She failed in every possible way." "I try not to think about it in terms of winning and losing," I said. "That makes it personal. It wasn't really about me versus Patricia. It was about what was right versus what was corrupt. The system worked. That's what matters." Spoken like someone who's moved past anger. That's healthy. I powered up my hydraulic press, listening to the quiet electric motor hum to life. The press that Patricia had called dangerous, that she tried to ban, that had become the focal point of her harassment campaign. It was just a tool, well maintained and properly operated. The danger had never been in the equipment. It had been in someone who abused power and tried to force compliance through intimidation. Tyler Henderson showed up a few minutes later for his regular after-school session. We were working on a project for his school's robotics team, fabricating custom chassis components that needed precise tolerances. "Mr. Armstrong," Tyler said as he put on his safety glasses, "I was thinking about something. You know how everyone talks about your fight with the HOA and everything. What would you have done if you'd lost?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't know. Maybe I would have moved, or maybe I would have closed the shop and found other work. But I don't think I would have given up without trying. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. The outcome isn't always in your control, but the effort is. My dad says you're the reason he started going to HOA meetings and paying attention to community stuff. He said he was embarrassed that he didn't support you earlier when Patricia was causing problems. Your dad doesn't need to feel embarrassed. Most people don't want conflict. That's natural. The important thing is that when the truth came out, the community made the right choices. We worked together for the next 2 hours, Tyler learning and me teaching. This, I realized, was the real legacy of the whole ordeal. Not the legal victory, not the awards, but the relationships built and the knowledge shared. The community was stronger because people had learned to stand up against corruption. Young people like Tyler were learning that rules and safety mattered, but so did standing up for yourself. As the sun set and Tyler headed home, I cleaned up my shop and prepared to close for the day. The hydraulic press sat in its designated spot, clean and ready for tomorrow's work. The shop was organized, safe, and productive. Everything I'd fought to protect was still here, still functioning, still serving its purpose. I locked up and walked back to my house, satisfied with the day's work and content with how my life had turned out. The fight with Patricia and the HOA felt like it belonged to another lifetime, a challenge that had shaped me but no longer defined me. The neighborhood was quiet as evening settled in. Lights came on in houses up and down Maple Ridge Drive. Children played in yards. Families ate dinner together. The community was healthy and whole, no longer under the thumb of a corrupt HOA president. And in my shop, my hydraulic press stood ready for another day of productive, safe work. The tool that had sparked a community crisis had become a symbol of standing up for what was right. Not because it was inherently special, but because defending it had required defending principles that mattered, principles of fairness, legality, and integrity. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the stars come out over Riverside. Marcus and Jennifer walked by on an evening stroll and stopped to chat. Sandra Chen drove past and waved. Tyler's younger sister rode by on her bicycle, her parents watching from their front yard. This was what community was supposed to be. Not perfect, not without challenges, but fundamentally good. Built on respect, fairness, and the rule of law rather than the whims of petty tyrants. The hydraulic press controversy had tested the community and found it wanting, but it had also provided an opportunity for growth and change. Patricia Morrison's fall had created space for better leadership. Her corruption had prompted reforms that made the HOA stronger and more accountable. Her harassment of me had led to safety standards that benefited everyone. Sometimes good things emerged from bad situations, not because the bad situations were good, but because people chose to respond with integrity and determination. That was the real story here, not about a hydraulic press or an HOA president or even about me. It was about a community finding its moral center and choosing to do better. I finished my beer and went inside, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. My shop was safe, my business was thriving, and my conscience was clear. Patricia Morrison was in prison where she belonged, paying for her crimes. The HOA was functioning properly under honest leadership, and my hydraulic press continued to produce quality work, day after day, exactly as it was meant to do. Justice had been served, not through revenge or anger, but through standing firm on principle and trusting the system to work. It had taken time, money, and stress, but the outcome was worth it. The community was better. The rules meant something again. And somewhere in California, OSHA inspectors were using photos of my shop to teach others about proper safety standards. Life was good. The hydraulic press hummed. And tomorrow, I'd wake up and do it all again.